The evening felt slightly heavier than usual, as if the air listened. Soft light from the living room window rested gently on the wooden floor, moving very slowly as the sun lowered outside. The city noise stayed faint and distant, like it did not want to disturb anything inside. In that quiet space, the silence felt aware, as if it carried some small secret that had not yet found its words. Keanu noticed that his own breathing had become slower and deeper, and he could not explain why the room suddenly felt more serious than before. On the table in front of him lay a single white envelope. It had arrived less than an hour ago, delivered by a polite assistant who said almost nothing and then left quickly. There was no logo, no extra design, only his name written in neat blue ink in the center. At first he thought it was just another formal invitation for another normal event. Yet his hands did not reach for it right away, and that small delay told him something was different. He simply watched the envelope for a while, feeling a quiet pull he could not fully understand. When he finally picked it up, the paper felt very smooth under his fingers, almost like someone had chosen it on purpose for something meaningful. He opened it carefully and caught a faint, clean smell of paper and ink. Inside was a folded letter, written in a clear and steady handwriting that looked patient. He began reading, and the first line made him pause longer than he expected. It said that some debts of the heart never really fade with time. The words settled into him slowly, like they were remembering something he had not thought about in years. He kept reading, moving his eyes over every sentence with quiet attention. The letter spoke about a charity event in the city, planned for the coming weekend, dedicated to families who had lost their homes many years ago. It mentioned a night of heavy rain, broken streets, and people who had no safe place to sleep. Then it thanked certain people who had helped without asking for any credit. His chest tightened slightly when he reached the next part, because the tone changed in a very personal way. The writer said that only he and Sandra Bullock could truly understand the real reason for this event. The letter explained that both of them were being invited together, not as celebrities, but as two people who once made a choice that changed many lives. There were no details about what the program would include, no list of guests, no schedule. There was only this gentle request that they come, listen, and stand in that room for one important reason. The signature at the bottom showed a name he did not recognize at all, yet the emotion in the writing felt strangely familiar. It felt like someone who had waited a long time to finally reach them. Keanu leaned back in his chair and let the letter rest on his lap. For a few seconds he stared at the ceiling, following the quiet movement of a shadow on the wall. He tried to understand what exactly was bothering him, because the letter was kind and respectful, not threatening in any way. Still, there was a feeling in his chest that was not simple calm. It felt like standing near the door of an old memory that had been closed for a very long time. He thought about the many times he had helped quietly in the past, when he did not want anyone to know his name was attached. There had been moments when he sent support silently, asking that nothing be written about it, no announcements, no photographs. He remembered one specific time, years ago, when the news showed images of destroyed homes and frightened families in another part of the world. He had not been alone then. Sandra had also watched those reports, and they had spoken more than once about what could be done. They had both felt that usual mix of helplessness and urgency that comes when you see people suffering far away, and you are safe in a warm room. His phone buzzed softly on the table beside the letter, breaking the heavy stillness. He thought about ignoring it for a moment, just to keep the silence untouched, but then he glanced at the screen. Sandra's name glowed back at him, and a small knowing feeling passed through him. It did not surprise him at all that she was calling at this exact moment. He answered, and her familiar voice carried a soft tension that matched his own mood. She told him she had just received a letter, too, one that felt strangely personal. She described her envelope, simple and white, with her name written in careful blue ink just like his. She said the writer spoke about families who had lost homes many years ago, and about a kind of help that had arrived quietly when everything felt desperate. Her voice grew even softer when she said that his name was written inside the letter as well. Together, they slowly compared details, and it did not take long to realize the letters were almost the same. Both mentioned a charity event, both talked about silent support from the past, and both insisted that only the two of them together could understand the true meaning behind the evening. There was a short pause on the call, filled only with quiet breathing and the distant sound of traffic from their separate windows. Then Sandra said that reading the letter brought back an old night she had tried not to think about very often. She remembered watching heartbreaking reports about a distant disaster and feeling a deep ache in her chest. She remembered calling him back then, wanting to talk to someone who would understand why she felt so restless and so moved by strangers she would never meet. Together, they had decided to help, but only if their names never appeared anywhere. They had asked the charity teams at the time to keep their involvement private, to let the focus stay on the families, not on them. There had been no interviews, no photos, no official gratitude in public. They had made their donations under layers of quiet conditions, and then stepped away so the world could move forward without attaching their faces to that pain. Now, years later, someone had clearly pulled away those layers and traced the help back to them. The question that gently hung between them on the call was simple but heavy. Why now? Since they could not speak that question with a question mark, they spoke it as a feeling instead. Sandra admitted that she felt a strange mix of nervousness and warmth. It felt like someone had watched that moment of kindness from far away and held on to it like a personal treasure. Keanu said he felt something similar, as if their old silence had suddenly grown a voice. He did not sense anything unkind in the letter, yet its intensity was undeniable. It felt as if they were being invited not to a show, but to a memory that belonged to many people at once. They both wondered aloud if their presence might disturb the quiet nature of what they had done before. Maybe it was better to stay hidden and let the gratitude remain nameless. Yet another thought slowly appeared between them. Sometimes, people who survive great loss need a human shape to attach their hope to. Sometimes it can help them heal when they can look into the eyes of someone who cared, even if that care came from far away. Kindness did not change just because it was seen. It was still kindness, still a choice, even when someone pointed a gentle light at it. After circling these feelings for a while, they agreed on one important detail. If they attended, they would arrive without cameras, without press, without any public announcement. They would not use the evening to promote anything, and they would not let it turn into a spectacle. They would simply come as guests who once tried to help, and they would listen. They would allow the organizer and the people in that room to lead the story. They would offer their quiet presence and nothing more. When they finally ended the call, the silence in both their homes felt different, as if it had accepted their decision. Over the next few days, the sense of mystery only grew stronger. Another short message arrived from the organizer, filled with gratitude and humility, yet still careful about details. Again, there was no list of speakers, no program, no description of what would happen on stage. The message only repeated one clear idea. The night was not about exposure. It was about a promise made long ago in silence. It said that the people in that hall had been waiting for this moment for many years. Keanu read that line again and again, feeling its quiet weight settle deeper into him. Somewhere else in the city, Sandra stood near her window in the evenings and watched the lights move across the glass. She saw her reflection and the city behind it, mixing into one image. In that reflection, she saw the younger version of herself who had first watched those terrible reports years ago. She remembered sitting on her couch, remote in hand, heart hurting for people she had never seen before. She remembered her decision when she called him back then, saying they should help quietly and completely, with no need for a spotlight. She had believed that the story ended there. Now she understood that stories do not always end where we expect them to end. Sometimes they keep growing inside other people, in their memories and their hearts, until the time finally comes when they need to speak. This event felt like that moment for someone, maybe for many people. The thought made her eyes feel warm, though she did not cry. Instead, she placed her hand on the window glass for a second and whispered that she hoped they could handle whatever would be shared that night with enough grace. When the evening of the event finally arrived, the sky turned a soft gray, not dark, not bright, just calm. The air carried that quiet feeling that comes before something important, even if no one outside knew what it was. Keanu chose a simple, neat suit, nothing loud, nothing that shouted for attention. He wanted to move through the hall like a regular guest, not a star. Sandra chose an elegant but gentle dress with no bright colors, something that felt respectful but not showy. They both moved toward the venue from different sides of the city, each feeling the same quiet pull inside. As they approached the building, both noticed the same thing in different moments. The entrance did not have huge banners or loud decorations. It looked almost modest. A soft light glowed from inside the glass doors, and they could see silhouettes moving slowly in the lobby. There was no red carpet, no flashing cameras outside, only a few volunteers guiding people in with warm smiles. The building did not shout for attention. It invited it in a calm way. Standing just a few steps from the door, each of them took one slow breath. Neither knew exactly what waited for them inside, or who would stand before them with a story. All they knew was that the night held a connection between their quiet decision from years ago and the lives of people who had carried that help in their hearts. They could feel that something inside the hall was ready to speak, and that their role was simply to listen and stand with kindness. With that understanding resting gently in their minds, they moved toward the doors, ready to step into the story they never expected to see again. The hall felt unusually still when Keanu stepped through the doors. The light inside was soft and even almost like it had been shaped to calm people before they entered. He paused for a moment to let his eyes adjust. The air carried a faint scent of polished wood and fresh flowers, yet there was something else beneath it, something he could not name. It felt like a quiet anticipation lived in the space, waiting for a certain breath or a certain step to begin moving. He took another slow breath and walked forward with steady calm. Sandra arrived only a minute later through a side entrance guided by a volunteer. The moment she entered, she felt a gentle pressure in her chest, the kind that appears when a room is filled with emotions not yet spoken aloud. Her eyes moved across the hall and then stopped when she saw Keanu near the center. He turned slightly as if he sensed her presence before seeing her. There was a softness in her smile, the kind that comes when a familiar face makes everything feel less heavy. She walked toward him and felt the stillness settle around them like a careful blanket. They greeted each other quietly, both aware that the mood of the hall was too sensitive for anything loud. The volunteers guided them toward their seats, but even in those steps, they noticed something unusual. People were already sitting in rows, but no one was speaking. None of the usual chatter that fills charity events floated in the air. Instead, the crowd seemed to hold a collective breath. Some guests held small candles unlit. Others had envelopes in their hands. A few clutched photographs against their chests. Every face held calm respect, yet also carried a deep story beneath the surface. Sandra felt her heart beat steady but strong. She looked at these strangers and sensed that many of them had come with a purpose. Maybe some had waited years for this night to arrive. Keanu noticed the same quiet intensity in the room. He could feel the weight of unspoken emotions pressing gently but firmly from every side. He wondered if all these people somehow knew what he and Sandra had done long ago, or if they only knew parts of the story. Either way, their presence felt intentional, almost like a tribute that neither of them fully understood yet. The two of them sat in the second row, close to the center but not under a spotlight. The stage before them held a large curtain and a simple wooden podium. A soft white light glowed behind the curtain, creating a gentle outline of something hidden. Sandra glanced at it with quiet curiosity. She wondered if it covered a display or a memorial or perhaps a message from someone long gone. Keanu followed her gaze and felt the same subtle tension rise inside him. Whatever stood behind that curtain seemed to be the heart of this event. Before the program began, a gentle shifting moved through the audience. Many people straightened their backs and folded their hands, almost as if preparing for a shared moment of prayer. A woman seated behind Keanu whispered something to the person beside her, and although he could not hear the words, he felt the tremble in her voice. On the other side of the hall, a man touched the edge of a small photograph with trembling fingers, then held it closer to his heart. It was clear to both Keanu and Sandra that this gathering carried more meaning than the letter had revealed. A soft chime echoed through the hall, signaling the beginning of the event. The lights dimmed slightly, leaving the stage area brighter. The curtain fluttered for a second, as if responding to a subtle breeze. A tall man in a simple dark suit stepped onto the stage. His movements were calm and respectful, and when he reached the podium, he paused for several seconds before speaking. His eyes scanned the hall slowly, as if he wanted to acknowledge every person present. Then he spoke in a gentle voice that carried a steady emotional weight. He welcomed everyone and thanked them for attending. He explained that this night was not a typical charity gathering. Instead, it was a night built on memory, gratitude, and the strength of people who had survived a past filled with fear and loss. He said their community had been through something that changed them forever, but within that darkness, unexpected kindness had arrived from strangers who expected nothing in return. His tone softened even more as he mentioned that two of those strangers were sitting among them tonight. Sandra felt her breath catch in her throat, not from fear, but from the way the words were delivered. They were gentle, not exposing, not overwhelming. Keanu felt a calm respect radiate from the speaker, not a spotlight meant to praise them, but a gesture meant to honor the silent choices that helped so many. The man continued, saying that for years the community searched for the people who sent support without asking for any acknowledgement. But the donations came through quiet channels, hidden behind requests for privacy. For a long time, the community only knew that someone cared. The speaker then said something that deepened the suspense in the room. He explained that the truth had only come to light a few months ago when an old sealed letter was found in a box belonging to a woman who had passed away. Inside that letter were handwritten notes, receipts, and messages from volunteers who had worked closely with the anonymous donors. Through those clues, the organizers finally discovered the identities of the people who had changed their community future. At that moment, the entire hall shifted slightly, as if holding a collective breath. Sandra and Keanu exchanged a quiet look. Neither needed to speak. They both knew that what they once hoped would remain silent had now found its way into the open, but the mood in the hall reassured them. This was not a crowd seeking fame or drama. This was a group of survivors and families who wanted to share something meaningful, something they had carried for years. The speaker then stepped away from the podium and turned toward the curtain behind him. Lights dimmed once more, and a soft melody played in the background. The curtain began to rise slowly, not with any dramatic motion, but gently as if respecting whatever stood behind it. When the curtain fully lifted, a large wall of photographs appeared. The images were arranged in careful lines, showing families standing near the ruins of their homes, volunteers handing out supplies, and children holding blankets with grateful smiles. The wall displayed moments of fear, survival, endurance, and hope. In the center of the wall was a framed letter. The writing looked old and slightly faded. Even from where they sat, Keanu and Sandra could see that the letter was written with deep emotion. The hall stayed silent as everyone looked at the photos. Some people in the audience began to wipe their eyes. Others reached out and touched the hands of the people sitting next to them. The air filled with a soft unity, as if every story in those photographs was breathing again through the hearts of those who lived it. As Sandra looked at the images, her eyes softened. She remembered watching news reports back then and feeling a sharp ache inside her. She remembered struggling to sleep because she knew people were suffering far away while she sat in comfort. She remembered her urgent call to Keanu, asking him if they could help quietly. Seeing those photographs now felt like watching the other side of that decision. These were the people who lived through what she had only seen on a screen. These were the lives touched by that silent choice. Keanu felt the same wave of emotion rise in him. He had never needed acknowledgement, but seeing the gratitude on those faces felt deeply human. It reminded him that kindness moves in ways you cannot see until years later. He felt humbled, almost overwhelmed, yet grounded in the quiet truth that good choices travel far longer than we imagine. The lights returned to normal, and the speaker invited everyone to take a quiet moment of reflection. The hall stayed silent, but the air felt fuller, warmed by the shared emotions of the past and present. Then the speaker said that someone very important wished to address the room. Someone whose story connected deeply to that night years ago. Someone who had searched for the anonymous helpers for a very long time. From the side of the stage, a young woman stepped forward. Her hands trembled slightly, and she carried a small folded piece of paper. The audience leaned forward with quiet curiosity. Keanu and Sandra felt the same gentle tension. The story was about to shift again, and they could feel it. The young woman stood still for a moment at the edge of the stage, and the hall seemed to hold its breath with her. The soft lights touched her face in a gentle outline, revealing a mixture of calm and trembling emotion. She took one slow step forward, then another, moving with the careful grace of someone stepping into a memory she had carried for too long. Keanu noticed the slight shake in her fingers as she adjusted the small paper in her hand. Sandra felt her own heartbeat rise, sensing that whatever this young woman held inside her was not simple gratitude, but something shaped by years of quiet waiting. When the young woman reached the center of the stage, she looked at the audience first, then at the wall of photographs behind her. Her eyes softened as she breathed in, steadying herself. She lifted the folded paper, but for a moment she did not read it. Instead, she held it near her chest, almost like a fragile keepsake. She began speaking in a voice that was soft yet carried through the hall with clear intention. She said her name was Elena, and that she had come here today to honor someone whose words were written in the paper she held. Those words belonged to her late mother. Elena paused as her throat tightened, but she continued with gentle strength. She said that many years ago, during the disaster shown in the photographs, her family lost their home. They had lived in a small community at the edge of the flooded area. The storm struck in the night and destroyed almost everything they owned. For weeks they lived without a roof, without warm clothes, and without any sense of safety. She said her mother had tried to comfort her and her younger brother, even when she herself was breaking inside. Then she looked toward the audience and said that something unexpected happened during those dark days. A shipment arrived one morning with blankets, food, medical supplies, and temporary shelter kits. The volunteers told the community that the supplies had come from donors who wished to remain unknown. That was the first moment of hope the community had felt since the disaster began. Alina said her mother never forgot that day. She carried the memory of those supplies like a light she kept close to her heart. As Alina spoke, the hall grew even quieter. The audience listened with full attention, feeling the weight of every word. Keanu leaned forward slightly, sensing that this story held something deeply personal, something connected to their past in a way he had not anticipated. Sandra clasped her hands softly in her lap, her breaths growing slower as she felt the emotion rising from the stage. Alina then explained how her mother had written a letter years ago, a letter she never mailed because she had no idea who the donors were. She kept the letter inside a small box along with other precious memories. After her mother passed away, Alina found the box while cleaning the old storage room of their new home. She remembered sitting on the floor, surrounded by old photographs and folded clothes, when she opened the box and found the sealed envelope addressed to two strangers. Inside the envelope, she found the letter meant for the anonymous helpers, but there was something else tucked behind it. A few printed pages showing donation receipts and shipment records with the donors' names hidden under requests for privacy. Attached to those pages were notes written by volunteers who had worked closely with the donation channels. One of those volunteers had secretly written down the names of the donors in case the community ever needed to thank them in the future. When Alina read those names, she felt a shock that left her still for minutes. She never expected the people who helped her family to be anyone she knew. She expected kind strangers from far away with no connection to her world. Instead, she saw two names she recognized immediately: Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock. As Alina spoke their names aloud on the stage, a soft ripple moved through the audience, not loud, only a gentle wave of emotion. Many people turned toward Keanu and Sandra with expressions filled with gratitude. Some eyes glistened with tears. Some hands rested over hearts. It was not a reaction of shock or excitement. It was a reaction of deep human appreciation. Sandra felt the breath leave her chest in a warm exhale. She placed one hand gently over her heart as her eyes softened. The faces looking at them were not starstruck. They were grateful, vulnerable, and gentle. Keanu felt a steady warmth rise through him. He did not feel exposed or uncomfortable. He felt something else entirely. He felt connected. Alina then unfolded the paper she had been carrying and said she wished to read her mother's letter. She warned that the handwriting might shake because her mother had written it during one of her hardest days. The hall stayed silent as she began reading. Her voice trembled at first but grew steadier with each sentence. She read how her mother thanked the unknown helpers for giving them more than supplies. She said they had given her children a sense of safety in a time when everything felt lost. She wrote that she wanted to thank them face to face one day, but knew she might never know who they were. She ended the letter by saying that even if they never met, her gratitude would follow them like a quiet blessing whenever they walked through the world. When Alina finished reading, she folded the letter with slow tenderness. Her eyes lifted toward the audience again, and then finally toward Keanu and Sandra. She said she searched for a long time before finding a way to contact the organizers of this event. She told them she had only one wish. She wanted to thank the two people who helped her mother believe in hope when the world felt too heavy. The speaker stepped forward again and placed a supportive hand on Alina's shoulder. He said that Alina was not the only one who had found pieces of that old kindness. Other families had also discovered notes, photographs, and memories tied to the anonymous help they once received. Several families in the room had lived through that same storm, and many of them were here tonight because they wanted to honor the people who helped them rebuild their lives. The lights shifted slightly to brighten the center of the hall. Keanu felt every heartbeat inside him, steady and warm. Sandra felt her eyes grow moist, but she kept her expression gentle and grounded. The speaker invited Alina to step down from the stage. She approached the steps slowly, then walked toward the second row where they sat. As she reached them, her steps grew even more careful. She stood before them with trembling hands and a soft smile filled with gratitude. Her eyes shined not with excitement, but with quiet reverence. For a few seconds, none of them spoke. The hall stayed completely still. Then Alina bowed her head slightly and whispered, "Thank you." And in that whisper, the room felt transformed. The whisper from Alina seemed to hover in the air, gentle yet powerful, as if it carried the weight of every year she had waited to speak it. Keanu felt something shift inside him, not heavy but deeply grounding. He stood slowly, not wanting to overwhelm her with sudden movement. Sandra rose beside him with the same quiet grace. Together, they faced the young woman who now held the attention of the entire hall. Elena looked up at them with soft, shining eyes that spoke of memories, loss, survival, and gratitude woven together into one fragile expression. Keanu offered her a small nod filled with respect, and Sandra placed a gentle hand over her heart in acknowledgement. Elena drew a breath as if steadying herself for something even more personal. She said her mother would have been grateful to see this moment. Her voice trembled slightly, but her words stayed clear. Then she reached into her small bag and pulled out a folded photograph. She held it carefully as if it were a living part of her past. She looked at it for a moment before extending it toward Sandra. Sandra accepted the photograph with both hands, treating it as something delicate. The image showed Elena as a young girl, standing beside her younger brother under a temporary shelter kit. Her mother stood behind them with a tired but warm smile. The edges of the photo were worn, proving it had been handled many times. Sandra felt her breath soften as she traced the faces with her eyes. She remembered the night she had watched news about the disaster. She remembered the ache inside her when she saw children sleeping on cold ground. Seeing this photograph felt like walking into the other side of her own memory. While Sandra held the picture, Elena turned to Keanu and handed him a small folded note. He opened it carefully. Inside was a short message written by Elena's younger brother when he was a child. The handwriting was uneven with letters of different sizes. It said, "Thank you for helping us stay warm." Keanu felt something warm rise in his chest. He imagined the little boy who had written those words, trying to express something far larger than he could understand at that age. The note felt like a small piece of time preserved with love. The audience watched with quiet emotion. Many leaned forward, others wiped their eyes. The room felt filled with memories finding their way toward peace. For a moment, everything seemed calm. But then the speaker stepped forward again and said there was something more to share, something unexpected. His tone was gentle, but there was a clear tension beneath it, the kind that hinted at a truth that might shift the entire mood of the night. He explained that when the organizers began investigating the anonymous donations, they uncovered a detail that surprised them all. The donations had not only arrived during the first weeks of the disaster. There had been a second wave of support that came months later, long after the news cameras left, long after most people forgot. That support came from the same donors. Another shipment of supplies arrived during a time when the community felt abandoned again. That shipment allowed them to rebuild houses more quickly and helped several families return to stable lives. Sandra exchanged a quick glance with Keanu, both remembering the moment years ago when they quietly decided to send additional aid. They never spoke publicly about it. They never even mentioned it to each other after the action was complete. It had been a silent choice, born out of the belief that healing takes longer than the headlines say it does. Now that truth had resurfaced, carried by people who had lived its impact. The speaker continued, saying that one of the volunteers who handled those later supplies left behind a recorded message. He played the recording through the speakers. The hall filled with the warm but tired voice of an older man. He said the donors insisted on staying hidden, but he wanted the community to know that the second shipment arrived because those donors believed people deserved support even when the world had stopped watching. The man in the recording said that this kind of kindness came from rare souls who understood that healing was not quick or simple. As the recording ended, the hall remained silent. A different kind of emotion moved through the room now, deeper and more layered. There was gratitude, but also awe. There was warmth, but also a soft suspense, as if everyone felt that the story still held something they had not yet heard. Then the speaker invited two more guests to come forward. From the back row, an older couple slowly rose and made their way down the aisle. The woman held a small wooden box with both hands. The man supported her gently as they walked. The audience shifted to make space for them, their expressions soft with respect. When they reached the front, the woman looked at Keanu and Sandra with eyes full of quiet recognition. She said her house had been rebuilt with materials from the second shipment. She said she remembered the day she stepped inside her new home for the first time. She had cried because she finally had a roof strong enough to protect her children from rain. She told them she never expected to meet the people who made that possible. Then she opened the wooden box and revealed several handwritten messages from families who had moved back into rebuilt homes. She said they had collected these notes over the years, hoping one day they might know where to send them. The man then added that their community had prepared these letters long ago, unsure if they would ever reach the donors. He placed the box gently on the table before Keanu and Sandra. The box held a quiet weight of emotion. Notes written by people who wanted to express gratitude but had no address to send it to. Sandra touched the edge of the box with gentle fingers. She felt her throat grow tight. Keanu rested one hand softly on the wooden lid. He felt the weight of years inside that box, yet neither of them felt overwhelmed. Instead, they felt humbled, anchored by the truth that kindness leaves footprints even when you try to wipe them away. The room had become a living echo of their past actions. But then the speaker added something none of them expected. He said that one detail remained uncertain, one part of the story no one had solved yet. During the first shipment, an envelope had arrived with the supplies. The envelope contained a short handwritten message. It said, "You are not alone," and it bore a signature that did not match either of their names. The speaker paused, letting the suspense settle. The audience leaned in. Even Keanu and Sandra exchanged surprised glances. If the signature was not theirs, then who had written it? Who else had touched this story? And why did they choose to remain hidden? The hall quieted once more, dense with curiosity. Someone else had been part of the kindness. Someone neither of them knew about. And that mystery now stood waiting in the next shadow of the story. The silence that followed felt different from every quiet moment before it. It held a pulse of mystery, a soft thrum of something unfinished. The audience leaned forward without meaning to, as if the story itself had reached out and taken their attention by the hand. Keanu felt a slow breath move through him. Sandra felt her fingers curl gently against her dress, sensing that the night was shifting into deeper territory. Somewhere in this hall lived an answer they had not expected to search for. The speaker stepped back from the podium and allowed the weight of the revelation to settle. He said that the identity of the person who wrote "You are not alone" had been a question for years. At first, the community assumed it came from the donors, but later they realized the handwriting did not match. Volunteers tried to trace it, but the envelope carried no name and no clue. It had simply appeared with the first shipment, as if carried by the storm itself. Families held onto the message because it felt like a promise from someone who cared deeply. As the speaker explained this, Keanu felt something stir in the corner of his memory. Not a clear image, but a faint impression of a moment he had forgotten. Sandra seemed to feel something similar. She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to catch a whisper from the past. Neither of them spoke, but their eyes reflected the same quiet question. Who else had been moved during that time? Who else had reached across the world with kindness? The lights in the hall dimmed again, this time leaving a gentle spotlight over the stage steps. The speaker announced that there was someone present who wished to speak about that unsigned message. A murmur of curiosity moved through the audience, shaped by anticipation rather than noise. Sandra straightened slightly, and Keanu shifted his focus toward the side entrance as soft footsteps approached. An elderly man walked into the spotlight, leaning on a simple wooden cane. His posture was slow but steady. The moment the audience saw him, a wave of recognition moved through the room. Many people began whispering his name softly. He was a retired volunteer who had worked directly with the community during the disaster. His presence seemed to carry the memory of those difficult days, as if he had walked out of the past and into the present. He reached the podium and placed both hands on its edge, steadying himself before he spoke. His voice was gentle but carried the gravity of someone who had lived through countless storms. He said that he remembered the first shipment with unusual clarity. He remembered unloading supplies, checking lists, and preparing shelter kits. And he remembered the moment he found the envelope tucked inside a box of blankets. It had no name, only the note "You are not alone" written with a determined but shaky hand. The elderly man then explained something that shifted the entire mood of the hall. He said the message did not come from a donor. It came from one of the survivors, a woman from the same community who had lost her home and nearly lost her life. She had been rescued from the flood by a team of volunteers the night before the shipment arrived. She was weak, cold, and terrified, but she wanted to help the families around her. She asked for a piece of paper and wrote the message with trembling hands. She asked that it be placed with the supplies because she wanted the families to feel hope. She believed someone needed to remind them that no one faces loss alone. A soft gasp moved through the hall. The story had taken a turn none of them saw coming. The anonymous donor had not written the message. Someone who suffered had written it. Someone who had needed help had become a giver of hope in the same breath. Sandra felt her eyes warm, and she placed a hand gently over her mouth. She understood instantly what that meant. Kindness does not only travel from those who have more to those who have less. It also travels from those who have nothing but still choose to give. Keanu lowered his head slightly, touched by the strength of a stranger who had found courage during her darkest moment. The elderly man continued, saying the woman who wrote the message had no idea her words would become a symbol for the entire community. She passed away a few years after the disaster, but her message lived on. People would hang copies of it inside their rebuilt homes. Children kept it under their pillows during difficult nights. Volunteers carried it in their pockets during long months of rebuilding. Her words had become a lifeline for everyone who touched that paper. Then the elderly man looked directly at Keanu and Sandra. He said that while they sent help across oceans, this woman sent hope across broken hearts. Both acts came together to hold the community together during their hardest days. He said that kindness is not measured by size or distance. It is measured by the heart behind it, and that the night was meant to honor all three sources of kindness that saved them: the donors, the volunteers, and the survivors who still found light inside darkness. The hall stayed silent, but now the silence felt warm, full, and alive. Sandra reached for the wooden box on the table again, her fingers brushing over its smooth surface. Keanu looked at Alina, who had stepped aside but still stood near them. Her eyes were shining with a mixture of gratitude and awe. She said quietly that her mother had known the woman who wrote the message. She said her mother always believed that the message had reached the donors before reaching the survivors. This made Keanu pause. He asked Alina gently why her mother believed that. Alina said her mother thought the message was meant for anyone who was trying to help. She believed the donors needed to hear that they were not alone in caring. She believed that kindness travels in two directions, even if the people never meet. The words settled deeply into the room. The idea that hope had traveled from survivors to helpers created a connection none of them expected. Sandra felt her throat tighten again as she whispered that kindness finds its own path, even without names attached. Keanu nodded softly, letting Alina's words settle inside him like a quiet truth. The speaker stepped forward once more and said that the final part of the night was yet to begin. He said the community had prepared something special, something they had held on to for many years, waiting for the right moment to share. He asked the audience to stand. Slowly, gracefully, every person in the hall rose to their feet. In the center of the stage, the lights brightened and revealed a long white cloth covering something behind the photograph wall. Volunteers stepped forward and prepared to lift the cloth. The audience watched with deep anticipation. Keanu and Sandra felt their hearts steady in their chests, sensing that the moment held something powerful. As the cloth was lifted, a sight emerged that neither of them expected. And the truth waiting behind it would complete the circle in a way none of them could forget. The white cloth lifted slowly, almost respectfully, as if the volunteers understood the weight of what waited beneath it. When the fabric finally fell away, a soft, collective breath moved through the hall. Standing behind the photograph wall was a tall sculpture made of simple wood and brushed metal. It was not grand or polished. It looked humble, handmade, created with care rather than money. At the sculpture's center was a carved message written in smooth curves. It read, "We rise because someone cared." The words were surrounded by small handprints pressed into the wooden panels. Some were tiny, belonging to children who had grown up since the disaster. Others were larger, shaped by adults who had survived and rebuilt their lives. Each handprint carried its own quiet story. They formed a circle around the center message, creating a symbol of all the hands that had lifted one another through their darkest time. Keanu felt the air shift in his chest as he stared at the sculpture. Sandra pressed a hand over her heart, her eyes softening with emotion. The speaker stepped forward and explained that the sculpture was created by the same community years after the disaster. The families had built it together to honor the kindness that saved them. It represented the donors who reached across the world, the volunteers who worked through exhaustion, and the survivors who found hope in the smallest actions. The sculpture had never been displayed publicly before tonight. It had been kept safe, waiting for the moment when all the pieces of the story could come together. He then revealed something even more unexpected. The sculpture was originally designed to stand in the center of their rebuilt community, but everyone voted to save it until the day they discovered the identities of the anonymous donors. Once the donors were known, they wanted to present it directly to them as a symbol of gratitude. It was not meant for fame or publicity. It was meant to complete a circle that had been open for years. The elderly man with the cane stepped toward the sculpture and placed his hand on one of the wooden panels. He said the community wanted to give the sculpture to Keanu and Sandra, not as an award or a trophy, but as a reminder of what their kindness helped create. He said it belonged to them because they helped shape the story that lived inside it. Then he added something that touched the entire room. He said the woman who wrote "You are not alone" would have wanted the sculpture to be shared with the people who carried kindness inside their hearts long before anyone asked for help. Keanu felt something rise inside him, something soft and steady. He stepped closer to the sculpture, tracing the carved words with his fingertips. He remembered the night when he and Sandra decided to send help. He remembered the simple hope that their support would reach the right people. He never imagined it would return to him in such a way, filled with faces, stories, and gratitude he could barely hold in one breath. He turned toward the crowd, his eyes warm and humbled. Sandra stepped beside him, placing her hand on the sculpture as well. She felt the texture of the carved letters, the small ridges of tiny handprints preserved in wood. She thought of Alina's mother, of the woman who wrote the message during her darkest moment, and of all the people who rebuilt their lives through courage and unity. She felt tears gather gently, but she kept her expression soft and steady. She turned toward the community with gratitude that seemed to fill her entire being. The speaker invited Keanu and Sandra to share a few words. For a moment, neither of them moved. They both understood the responsibility of the moment. It was not a time for polished speeches or rehearsed lines. It was a moment meant for sincerity. Keanu finally stepped forward and spoke in a calm, steady voice. He said he and Sandra never expected their names to appear in this room. They helped because helping felt right, because kindness does not need attention to matter. He said this sculpture did not belong to them alone. It belonged to everyone who stood in this hall, everyone who survived, everyone who rebuilt, and everyone who cared. Sandra spoke next. Her voice was gentle but filled with deep emotion. She said that kindness is not a one-way gift. It moves from heart to heart, changing shape as it travels. She said she learned tonight that the people they helped also helped them, even without knowing it. Their courage, their letters, their message of "you are not alone" had created a circle of hope that reached across years and continents. She said the sculpture would not remind her of her own actions, but of theirs. Of resilience, gratitude, and the power of people who stand together. The audience listened with full hearts, many wiping tears quietly. Alina stepped forward again, her eyes glowing with gratitude. She said the community wanted one final gesture. She invited everyone in the hall to lift their candles. Volunteers moved through the rows, lighting each candle one by one. The soft glow grew until the entire hall shimmered with warm light. Keanu and Sandra watched as the room transformed into a living reminder of hope. When all the candles were lit, the speaker asked everyone to repeat the message that had carried them through their hardest days. The message written by the woman who believed hope mattered even when everything felt broken. In one unified voice, the entire hall spoke the words. "You are not alone." The sound filled the space like a gentle wave, rising toward the ceiling, touching every corner, wrapping around every person present. Keanu felt his chest warm with gratitude. Sandra felt her breath catch as the emotion settled through her like soft light. Together, they stood in the glow of hundreds of candles, surrounded by people whose lives had intertwined with theirs through a quiet act of kindness. The elderly man stepped forward once more and placed his hand over his heart. He thanked Keanu and Sandra not only for their help, but for coming tonight. He said presence is its own form of kindness. He said many years had passed, but the memory of their compassion had stayed alive because kindness never truly fades. As the candles flickered softly, Keanu stepped closer to Sandra. They shared a small, quiet smile, the kind that holds years of understanding. In that moment, they did not feel like actors or public figures. They felt like two human beings standing inside a story of resilience, hope, and unity. They felt humbled to be part of something bigger than themselves. The candles slowly dimmed as the volunteers guided the closing moments of the event, but the warmth in the hall stayed. The sculpture remained standing, glowing under the soft lights. People approached it one by one, touching the handprints, whispering thanks, and honoring the memory of everyone who played a role in their healing. Keanu and Sandra stayed until the hall emptied, speaking quietly with families, accepting small handwritten notes and offering gentle smiles. When they finally stepped outside, the night air felt cool and peaceful. The sky above them was soft and clear, as if the world itself understood the weight of the evening. Sandra took a slow breath and said she would never forget this night. Keanu nodded, his expression calm and full. He said kindness has a way of returning when we least expect it. They walked toward the street, side by side, knowing the story that began with quiet help had now found its closing chapter. And as they walked, they felt the truth of the message that had shaped the entire night. They were not alone.